The universe was at war. It had started as a territorial dispute between the Dralic Dominion and the Kvar Syndicate, two galactic superpowers with empires stretching across thousands of star systems. What should have been a contained conflict escalated into something far worse. Alliances fractured, treaties collapsed, and soon, every major species in the known galaxy was drawn into the bloodshed. Entire fleets burned in the void. Planets were razed to ash. The war spread like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. And through it all, Earth remained silent. Not neutral. Not diplomatic. Just quiet. It made no sense. Humanity had a reputation. They weren't the strongest species. They didn't have the largest fleets or the most advanced technology. But they were adaptable, relentless, and above all else, they never backed down from a fight. And yet, as the galaxy tore itself apart, Earth did nothing. No declarations. No aid. No movement of fleets. Nothing. At first, the warring factions ignored them. The humans weren't a major player in the grand scheme of things. A single planet species with a few scattered colonies, barely a blip on the galactic stage. But as the war dragged on, as civilizations crumbled and battle lines redrew, curiosity turned to unease. Because Earth wasn't just uninvolved. They were untouched. While war swallowed entire systems, Earth's trade routes remained intact. Their colonies thrived. Their military remained fully operational, completely unscathed. And for the first time, the galaxy began to ask a question. Where was humanity? The first to investigate were the Zeldar, a minor species that had tried to remain neutral but were eventually forced into the war. Desperate for allies, their ambassador, Carix Vel, was sent to Earth. He arrived at Sol without resistance. There were no defense grids locking down the system, no patrolling warships demanding identification. It was as if Earth had simply disconnected. His ship descended through the blue atmosphere, past sprawling cities gleaming under the sun. Everything looked normal. Too normal. It was unsettling. Carix had expected war camps, defensive fortifications, or at the very least, the signs of a planet on high alert. Instead, he found parks full of people laughing, marketplaces bustling with trade, and ships moving leisurely through the skies as if the greatest war in history wasn't raging just beyond their system. Something was wrong. He landed in Geneva, where the United Human Nations held their political offices. As he stepped onto human soil, escorted by a polite but unreadable security team, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had walked into something he didn't understand. A human representative greeted him in a grand chamber, offering a warm smile and a firm handshake. Ambassador Vel, the man said, his voice calm. Welcome to Earth. Carix studied him carefully. He had met many humans before, but something about this one set him on edge. Not his appearance, his presence. There was no fear in his eyes. No desperation. Just patience. Your people have not participated in the war, Carix said, watching for a reaction. The galaxy is burning, and yet Earth remains untouched. Why? The human smile didn't waver. Because we chose not to fight. Carix frowned. That is not an answer. The human motioned toward a seat. Then let's talk. Carix hesitated, then sat. The human steepled his fingers. Tell me, Ambassador, how is the war going? Carix exhaled sharply. The Dominion and the Syndicate have collapsed into infighting. The Varnak fleets are scattered, and the Rothari homeworlds have fallen. There is no order left. Every species fights for survival. And your people? Carix's mandibles tightened. Dying? The human nodded slowly as if he had expected the answer. And now you come to us? Carix's pride bristled. We need allies. The human leaned back, studying him. You don't need allies. You need an exit. Carix's breath caught. The human knew. He knew the war was lost. Knew that the ambassador wasn't here for an alliance, but for something more desperate. How long? The human asked. Carix exhaled. Months. If that. A long silence stretched between them. Then for the first time the human's smile faded. Then you're already too late. A cold chill crept down Carix's spine. What do you mean? The human stood and gestured for him to follow. They walked through the halls of the UHN building, past serene courtyards and massive windows overlooking the vibrant city. Your war was lost before it even began, the human said. You all fought like it was a battle to be won. But it was never a war of victory. He stopped in front of a massive holo display. With a simple gesture he activated it. The screen flared to life, showing a map of the galaxy, but something was wrong. Entire sectors were empty. Not conquered. Not occupied. Just gone. Carix felt his throat tighten. What is this? The human's voice was quiet. The war was never about territory. It was about attrition. You were all too busy fighting each other to see the real enemy coming. Carrick's turned to him. What enemy? The human tapped the display. A darkened sector lit up, stretching far beyond the known territories. They call themselves the Harbingers. Carrick's had never heard of them. The name didn't appear in any galactic records. No species had ever mentioned them. Yet, as the map zoomed in, he saw the wreckage of entire fleets floating in the void. Not just ships, planets, whole civilizations erased. He staggered back. This can't be possible. The human's gaze was cold. We saw them first. Carrick's mind raced. Why didn't you tell the galaxy? Why didn't you warn us? The human folded his arms. Because you wouldn't have listened. You were too busy waging war against yourselves. Earth stayed quiet because we knew what was coming. And while you all tore each other apart, we prepared. Carrick's felt his legs weaken. How long have you known? The human looked at him. Long enough. And for the first time, Carrick's realized the truth. Earth hadn't stayed out of the war because they were weak. They had stayed out because they knew what was next. And as he stared at the cold certainty in the human's eyes, he realized something else. The war they had fought was nothing. The real war had yet to begin.
Carrick's throat was dry. He forced himself to speak, though his voice came out weaker than he intended. What do you mean, the real war has yet to begin? The human, still composed, turned his attention back to the galactic display. With a flick of his fingers, the map zoomed out, revealing the full extent of the Harbinger incursion. Carrick's felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't just an invasion. This was an eradication. Entire sectors, once teeming with life, were marked as silent. There was no record of planetary battles, no distress calls, no refugees. Just empty space where civilizations had once thrived. He had seen planetary destruction before. He had seen war. But this was different. The humans knew it too. Carrick's turned to the human representative, his mandibles clicking with unease. You're saying that while the rest of the galaxy was killing each other, this enemy was watching? The human's expression remained unreadable. Not watching. Carrick's breath hitched. Hunting. The weight of that single word pressed against his chest. Carrick's species, the Zeldar, had always believed themselves to be survivors. They had endured war, famine, even planetary collapse. But they had never encountered an enemy that wiped out entire civilizations without a trace. How do you know all this? He asked. The human exhaled slowly, as if preparing himself for the truth. Because we fought them. Carrick's mind reeled. Impossible. The Harbingers had never been recorded, never been mentioned in any council, never been whispered about in the darkest corners of galactic politics. If humanity had fought them, why hadn't anyone heard of it? The human studied his reaction and, for the first time, his expression shifted. You're wondering why no one knows? Carrick's nodded. The human reached into a console and pulled up archived battle footage. The screen flickered, and Carrick's blood ran cold. A desolate battlefield stretched before him. A ruined planet, the sky thick with black smoke. The wreckage of ships, some human, some unfamiliar, lay scattered across a vast expanse of lifeless terrain. Nothing moved, not the wind, not the remains. Then, a shape appeared. It was unlike anything Carrick's had ever seen. It moved with unsettling precision, its dark metallic form shifting unnaturally as it stepped over the ruins of the fallen. Then another appeared.
And another. Tall.
Unfamiliar.
Silent.
Carrick's leaned in, his instincts screaming at him to run, even though he was only watching a recording. The footage continued, and then, the screaming began, It wasn't human. It wasn't any species he recognized. It was a wretched, mind-breaking sound that did not belong to the living. The footage cut to black. Carrick's forced himself to breathe. He looked at the human, who now wore a grim expression. How? Carrick's voice was barely a whisper. The human answered, without hesitation. We were scouting beyond the edge of known space. Small fleets, single expeditionary missions. The first ships disappeared without a trace. No wreckage, no distress signals, just gone. He turned back to the console and pulled up another display. It was a list of missing vessels, hundreds of them. Then, one ship made it back, the human continued. A science vessel called the Palisade. It came back barely functional. The crew, what was left of them, were catatonic. It took weeks to extract anything useful from their logs. He glanced at Carrick's. But one thing was clear. He pointed to the footage. These things aren't just soldiers. They aren't an invading force. They are something far worse. Carrick's mind was racing. The war, the fighting, all of it had been nothing but a distraction. The true enemy had been lurking in the void, waiting for the galaxy to be at its weakest. And now they were coming. His mandibles tightened. If you knew this, why didn't you warn the rest of the galaxy? The human's eyes darkened. We tried. The words hung heavy between them. Carrick's felt his pulse hammering against his skull. What do you mean you tried? The human turned the display off and faced him directly. The Galactic Council didn't believe us. The Dominion dismissed our reports as human paranoia. The Kfar claimed we were spreading false information to weaken their war efforts. The Rothari accused us of manipulating data to gain political leverage. He took a slow breath. No one listened. Carrick's felt sick. His own people, the Zeldar, had refused to get involved in the war until it was too late. And now, they had walked blindly into an extinction-level event. What are these things? He asked, voice hoarse. The human was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. They don't speak. They don't negotiate. They don't leave survivors. He exhaled. They are the last thing you see before your world goes dark. Carrick swallowed hard. A heavy silence filled the room. Finally, he asked, what is Earth's plan? The human gave him a long, measured look. Carrick had expected him to talk about fleets, weapons, strategies. He had expected a tactical breakdown of how humanity planned to fight back. Instead, the human simply said, we are ready. Carrick felt a shiver run through him. Earth had gone quiet. Not out of fear. Not out of cowardice. But because they had already prepared. The war the galaxy had been fighting had been pointless. Humanity had seen the real war coming. And they had been waiting.
Carrick felt like the floor beneath him was falling away. His people, the Dominion, the Kfar, the Rothari, all of them had spent years bleeding for scraps of territory, fighting over the remnants of an empire already doomed to die. And the whole time, Earth had been waiting for something much worse. His voice was hoarse. You were never going to intervene in the war, were you? The human representative met his gaze with something that was not arrogance, nor cruelty. It was certainty. No, the human said. Because fighting that war was pointless. We knew how it would end. And we knew what was coming next. Carrick felt anger rising in his chest. You let the rest of the galaxy burn while you hid behind your borders? You watched billions die? The human didn't flinch. If we had joined, what would have changed? Carrick opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. He thought of the battles, the endless conflicts, the betrayals, the shifting alliances that had torn the galaxy apart. Even if Earth had intervened, the war would have raged on. The factions would have still fought. The Dominion and the Syndicate would never have stopped their war of dominance. The Rothari would never have abandoned their centuries-old feuds. Nothing would have changed. And humanity had known that. Carrick clenched his fists. So what now? The human exhaled, glancing toward the galactic map. That depends. The Harbingers are coming. They don't just conquer, they erase. We're not dealing with an enemy that wants to rule. We're dealing with one that wants to end us. He turned back to Carrick, his expression unreadable. So you tell me, Ambassador. What do you want to do? Carrick's mind spun. The Zeldar were not warriors. They were diplomats, merchants, survivors. Their greatest strength had always been adaptation, knowing when to retreat, when to negotiate, when to surrender. But surrender wasn't an option now. He had seen the footage. The Harbingers didn't take prisoners. They didn't leave anything. His people were scattered, their fleets shattered. If they tried to run, they would be hunted down. If they tried to hide, they would only delay the inevitable. There was only one option left. He straightened his back. You said humanity is ready. Ready for what? The human's lips curled into something that was almost a smile, but not quite. For war. Carrick expected some grand revelation, some show of force that would shake the galaxy. Instead, the human pressed a single command on the console. The room darkened. And then the map changed. The galactic map, which had once displayed empires, trade routes, and occupied war zones, now showed something else. Lines. Networks. Carrick's frowned. What is this? The human folded his arms. These are our fail-safes contingencies we've been preparing for decades. Hidden supply caches. Deep space stations. Contingent colonies beyond the known sectors. Ghost fleets waiting in the dark. He zoomed in, revealing an uncharted sector of space. The void beyond human space had always been assumed to be empty. It wasn't. Dozens of artificial installations were nestled inside uncharted nebulae, deep space anomalies, and black hole event horizons, entire stations, fleets, weapons platforms built beyond the eyes of the galaxy. Carrick could hardly process what he was looking at. You've been preparing for this? For how long? The human exhaled. Long before the Dominion and the Syndicate's war started. We knew, Carrick. We knew that if we expanded too fast, too recklessly, we'd be exposed. So we waited. We built in secret. We planned for a war that hadn't begun yet. He turned back to Carrick. And now it's here. Carrick felt a shiver crawl down his spine. This was what the rest of the galaxy had failed to understand about humans. It wasn't their technology. It wasn't their weapons. It wasn't even their resilience. It was their patience. They had known the war was coming. And now, when the galaxy was at its weakest, they would be the ones standing ready while everyone else scrambled to catch up. Carrick clenched his fists. His people, his entire species was facing extinction. And yet, for the first time since the war began, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. He met the human's gaze. If we stand with you, what happens next? The human smiled. You survive. Carrick took a slow breath. The decision had already been made. The Zeldar would fight. Not for power, not for conquest, but because it was the only option left. And they wouldn't fight alone. He looked back at the map. At the silent fortresses hidden in the void, at the fleets that had remained untouched while the galaxy bled. The harbingers were coming. And Earth was waiting. The moment the decision was made, everything changed. Carrick had expected hesitation, delays, some kind of bureaucratic process before humanity took action. Instead, the human representative simply nodded, inputted a command into the console, and within moments the quiet war machine of Earth began to awaken. The galactic map flickered. The hidden fail-safes, those secret installations buried in the void, came online. Ghost fleets, once thought to be nothing more than rumor, activated, their transponders lit up, broadcasting encrypted signals only human systems could read. Warships, sleek and dark, emerged from the silent sectors beyond the known charts. They had been waiting, not building, not preparing, but waiting, Carrick felt his breath catch as one of the first transmissions from these hidden forces echoed across the command room. All units confirm readiness. Awaiting deployment orders. The human representative turned to Carrick, calm as ever. You wanted to know what comes next? He gestured to the display. This. Carrick struggled to process it all. How? He stopped himself. He already knew the answer. Humanity had always been different. They didn't rush into wars they couldn't win. They didn't expand recklessly like the Dominion or the Syndicate. They had watched. They had waited. And now, as the rest of the galaxy stood on the edge of extinction, they were stepping onto the battlefield on their own terms. Another message came through. A fleet mobilization directive. The message was simple. Operation Eclipse is a go. Carrick turned to the human. What is Operation Eclipse? The human exhaled as if he had been holding on to the secret for too long. It's the end of the harbingers. Carrick studied him. You're that confident? The human's eyes darkened. No. I'm that prepared. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Carrick saw something in the human expression that terrified him. There was no arrogance. No pride. Just the cold, calculated certainty of a species that had decided the war was already over. The harbingers had made a mistake. They had let humanity prepare. Carrick straightened. What do you need from the Zeldar? The human pressed another command, and the display shifted to a different part of the galaxy. A route, hidden, uncharted, running through dead systems that no empire had ever dared to colonize. You have something we don't, the human said. A history of survival. Your people know how to move undetected, how to navigate dangerous territories without being noticed. He pointed to the route. We're going to use that. Carrick frowned. You want to move your fleets through silent sectors? That's suicide. The harbingers won't see it coming, the human interrupted. Carrick paused, because he understood now. They weren't going to fight the harbingers head-on. They were going to ambush them. Carrick's felt a mix of awe and horror. You're turning their own tactics against them? The human nodded. They hunt in the dark. So now we become the dark. Carrick exhaled. How long do we have? The human's gaze flicked back to the map, where distant sectors, once thought untouched, began flickering with red warnings. They're already moving. Carrick clenched his fists. The final war wasn't coming. It had already begun. And for the first time in the history of the galaxy, the Harbingers were about to learn what humanity truly was. Not prey. Not weak. Not afraid. They had gone quiet for a reason. And now they were going to show the universe why.